must control our destiny. Self-determination. Self-determination. Kujichagulia. Self-determination. So as we educate our children, tell the truth. Let us always think about the millions who gave before and sacrificed their lives so that our mighty people would survive. And the glory of our past we soon revive, yeah. Every day we face a challenge. You and I, our future's hanging in the balance. So we must do whatever can be done. We must not be dependent on anyone. That way we can be sure that our interests are secure.
Greetings, everyone. So glad that you can join us on Saturday for our Pan-African monthly film series that happens once a month, every second Saturday of the month at 2 p.m. So we're so glad that you could join us. My name is Monica. I'm a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and our overall objective is Pan-Africanism, to organize and unify one socialist Africa. And there are chapters all over the world, including Africa, where it started in Ghana. And we are doing this film from Tiwa territory, that's so-called Albuquerque, New Mexico. And for today, the film that we're going to be showing is the Summer of '67. And what it is, it's a news story about the uprisings that happened in Detroit. Now, when you're watching this film, be very critical of what you're seeing because it is from a news station. And if you were joined us this week on Pan-African Weekly News, Ramito just dropped so much knowledge on how the news is controlled by capitalists, right? And it'll be having you think that your enemies, right? What Malcolm X said, right? Be thinking you're not knowing who your enemy is. And so when you watch it with a critical lens, come with your questions, come with discussions, because we're going to have a discussion afterwards. So we're so excited to jump into the film and have the discussion after So here it goes, summer of 67. Take some notes and we'll see you soon.
In these times, it is becoming more and more difficult for developing third world countries to go forward. Because unfortunately, our economies remain by and large dependent on and tied to the capitalist world economies. And therefore, when the capitalist world goes through their cyclical crises, one after the other, it has an immediate effect on us. As we say at home, when the capitalist world catches a cold, we catch pneumonia. And the crisis in the capitalist world has been deep. But not satisfied with all of that, what they have now done after cutting off aid, cutting off trade, cutting off investment, making it virtually impossible to get money through the international financial institutions, now they are forcing more and more third world countries to go directly to the international capital market, to the big commercial banks to get loans. But the reality is that by forcing us more and more to have to go to the international capital market, the debt trap is intensified even more. And while all of this is going on, sisters and brothers, there are so many people in the world who are unemployed, so many people in the world who are going hungry, to bed hungry every single night. So many millions in the third world who are illiterate and whose governments either do not care or feel they cannot do anything to solve that problem. Unemployment, hunger, malnutrition, disease, illiteracy. These are the crimes and the sins that are visited upon the poor developing countries of the third world, while the industrialized countries continue to exploit our resources and to keep the profits.
The following program is brought to you in living color on NBC.
There's a great temptation to become shrill about what happened here in Detroit in July. It's a temptation we wish to avoid. Today, more than at any time any of us can remember, is a time for truth, and hysteria is no friend of truth. Some of what you see and hear will make you angry, but if it does no more than make you angry, we will have failed in our purpose. If it does not expose you to the desperation of many Negroes, a desperation that breeds the outrageous and lawless things being said and done by some Negroes. If it does not impress you with the absolute urgency of relieving that desperation, then we will not have communicated what Black America is trying to tell white America. For we believe that the greatest single need in America today is for communication between blacks and whites. But there can be no communication between minds closed by anger. 43 Americans died in these streets. 386 were injured. 477 buildings were damaged or destroyed. The city of Detroit was shut down. Something like it happened in 76 American cities this summer. We saw soldiers patrolling our streets. We saw stores and houses in our neighborhoods that looked as if they'd been hit by bombs. Next summer, it could look like this in the downtown sections of our cities. It could look like this in the neighborhood where you live. The simple fact is this: we're in the worst crisis we have known since the Civil War, and time is running short to try to find some answers to it. The belief is fading that answers can be found, and we're losing the will to search for them. Here in Detroit, well-meaning, hard-working people thought they had the answers. Detroit was prosperous. Most whites thought their relations with Negroes were good. There was no housing ghetto in Detroit. Negroes worked on the assembly lines at Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors without discrimination for top wages. 57% of the Negroes in Detroit owned cars. 45% of the Negroes owned their own homes. It was said Negroes don't live better anywhere in America than in Detroit. Detroit cared about its poor. Detroit spent $45 million last year in city and federal funds to help them. On child care, job training, welfare, housing. Detroit's programs were studied and admired by experts from all over America. Negroes held important jobs at City Hall, in the police department, in the school system. 12 Negroes were in the state legislature, 2 in Congress. On the surface, whites could see no unrest. White and black seemed to live comfortably together. White and Negro leaders agreed what had happened in Watts, in Harlem, in Newark, was unlikely in Detroit. One of them now says, we were doing all the textbook things, all the things we assumed prevented riots. What happened? What went wrong? We shall overcome again. This was the image of the Negro Revolution only a few years ago. Negro and white, side by side. Patient Negroes. After 250 years of slavery, 100 years of institutionalized degradation, a decade of unfulfilled promises, still patient.
We shall overcome.
The violence we saw was white. We saw Negroes hosed and beaten, harassed with dogs and cattle prods. Negroes who, whites assumed, would be satisfied if only they could sit in the front of a bus, go to a white school, vote, if only they could integrate. Then abruptly, shatteringly, the images were different. Burn, baby, burn. Drowned out, we shall overcome. 2 years ago, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, then Assistant Secretary of Labor, now Director of the Joint Center for Urban Studies at Harvard and MIT, wrote a report that foreshadowed some of the events that have so shocked us these last summers. The report began, the United States is approaching a new crisis in race relations. Do we know what happened to bring on this new crisis?
Nobody knows what happened, but I think you can talk about it in terms that make some sense. The first fact is that once the demands for civil liberties for Negroes in the South began to take effect, began to show some results, the Negro community moved from issues of liberty towards issues of equality. But for Negroes, equality meant two things, not just one. It meant more than simply equal opportunities for jobs, something comparable to the general standard of living, equal schools, equal rights to move around in the world. It also meant the demand for equal self-esteem, for an equal sense of your own worth and value, for the fact that black was just as beautiful in white America as anything else. Now, somehow or other, the expectations of both these groups of Negro Americans were greatly raised, and promises were made to them, and somehow both sets of promises were broken.
Well, didn't we, in a very real sense, encourage a lot of this? With the initial Negro resistance movement in the South, even though what they were doing violated the local law, we felt that law was unjust, and we said, all right, it's okay to violate that law, and blinded ourselves, perhaps willfully, at least temporarily, to the ominous portent of the violation of any law.
Perhaps necessarily. What were you going to do in the face of Bull Connor in Alabama, except say that man is unjust, his edicts must not be obeyed? But look, we did it. We legitimatized opposition to the police and disobedience to law. Now in the North it became a massive opposition to the rules of white society. The police had tried to tell us, I think, that this was happening in the slums, but somehow liberal Americans don't listen to police. The fact that it could become as open and could assert itself in the ways that we have seen this last summer was never believed. But suddenly, we tapped at every level of the Negro world the level of rage, of blind fury at the American social and racial system that could never have been conceived. Once the black people in the slums got up on their legs and defied the white police, a tremor, a shudder of self-recognition seemed to go all through the Negro world. And the middle class, as well as the lower class, suddenly said, we don't have to take it anymore. The rioters don't come from all levels, but the support comes from all levels. And increasingly from the upper levels of Negro society came the radical, militant ideologues saying that forget America, white America is an irredeemably racist country, and that the only course for the Negroes is to bring about a final, violent, apocalyptic confrontation of black and white.
There's no such thing as a nonviolent revolution. The only kind of revolution that's nonviolent is the Negro revolution. The only revolution based on loving your enemy is the Negro revolution. That's no revolution. A revolution is bloody. Revolution is hostile. Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way. And you sitting around here like a knot on the wall saying I'm going to love these folks no matter how much they hate me.
You're going to sit in front of your television set and listen to LBJ tell you that violence never accomplishes anything, my fellow Americans. But you see, the real problem with violence is that we have never been violent. We have been too nonviolent. Too nonviolent.
1967 was the third summer of the burning and looting of the black ghettos. This was Newark in July. In Newark, for the last time, we could still tell ourselves that the old answers would work. In Newark, Negroes were angry about the old evils: bad schools, police brutality, bad housing, lack of political power. We could still comfort ourselves in Newark that at least we understood the problem. We can no longer take that small comfort after Detroit. This was a new kind of riot. It happened for reasons we had not been willing to recognize. It happened with a new violence. And it is this riot we must understand if we're to do something about the dangers that face us now. It wasn't supposed to happen in Detroit, but it did happen. The first question to ask is, why did it happen here? This is Linwood and Pingree. A block of houses and stores was burned here. NBC News correspondent Bill Matney walked with Daniel P. Moynihan through what used to be a place where people lived.
Why did it happen? What happened? Who was involved? Some people rioted, most did not. And if some persons acted differently, there must be reasons. It would be unforgivable at this time to pretend to know more than we do, but here in Detroit, some of the reasons began to emerge, and they were wholly consistent with what we generally know about the way people behave in the modern world.
You're speaking in the context of violence?
Violence, and how it is that some people come to see their position in the world as unjust, and how they get to the point where they just can't take it anymore. You know, Bill, the houses that are here were good houses, weren't they?
Yes, they're good houses, and generally the people who live in this community are energetic, hard-working people. In most cases, you'll find both the husband and wife working, and it has to be regarded as a solid, stable, middle-class community.
This riot really have tore down the community, have ranked people's lives and homes, and it have been made a very bad neighborhood to live in. We would like to take action to see this neighborhood cleaned up and see decent people move in. Because anytime you pay $18,000 for a home, you don't want any and everything in there. I'm afraid of the people that hangs around on the counters. I'm really afraid of. I'd be afraid to send a child of mine to the store.
Somehow the Negro world itself has been pulling apart. On the one hand, a working class, middle class group doing well, taking advantage of every opportunity that comes its way. On the other hand, an underclass falling further behind than ever before. Look at this, Bill. This alley, that garbage is 50 feet from those other houses, and yet this is a world apart. This is a world of disorganization, of violence, of hurt people, crushed by conditions that they don't understand and the rest of America doesn't even want to admit exist. I don't think a person living in Europe today could believe that anybody in America would live as these families are forced to do. And there's something almost specially American about it. Filthy, rotted housing, and the back porch littered with broken down washing machines. We've got our priorities mixed up. We make too many automobiles, too many washing machines, let people rot all around them.
How many children?
I have 6.
Oh. And you are the sole support of your 6 children?
Yes, I am. And I would like to live in a better neighborhood, but they won't allow it because I don't have a husband with me. And they don't trust a woman by herself, you know.
When was the last time you saw your husband?
8.5 years ago.
Do you have any idea where he is now?
No, I don't.
Realistically, what do you think will happen to your children?
I really don't know. Sometimes I think of giving them up, you know, and to a home, somebody to take care of better than I can. And then I think of, keep trying myself. And with 6 children, it's not easy, really. It's not easy.
Everyone's been wondering who rioted here in Detroit. Who were the looters? The answer lies right here. These people looted. These people rioted. And some of these people threw the firebombs. They did it. The people who lived in and about this area. And that's the important thing to remember. They did it. There are about 100,000 people like them in Detroit. The lost, the dispossessed people outside our society.
The Swedish economist Gunnar Myrdal, who coined the term an underclass, people under the entire social structure and somehow cut off from it. In 1960, 10% of the Negro population in our country was not even counted in the census. Among young men, upwards of 25% were just missed altogether. And you're really down when you're not even a statistic. From a distance, the life of this class has a certain attraction. It has a certain glamour. It's a world of Saturday night. And the restraints and respectability of regular lives seem pretty boring and dull by contrast.
I learned to fight before I was 6. The only way I could get along. When you're raised on a dead end street, you gotta be tough.
But it's only when you get up close do you see the pain. It's only up tight that you realize here is a world in which there's very little love, and there's very little of anything that lasts, and there's so much hurt. We have no business acting surprised at all this. The signs that it was coming were unmistakable. What happened was that a great underclass formed in the Negro urban community. And the fact that such a class turned violent is about as natural as a social process can be. I guess it's also natural that America would not want to face that fact.
I want 3 men to work in a plant. The job starts at $2.61 an hour.
This is a hiring hall where men come looking for jobs that last one day. After 6 years of unbroken economic expansion, the month this riot took place, the unemployment rate for Negro youth was 25%. There is not another industrial democracy in the world that would dream of allowing the youth unemployment rate to reach 5%, yet 25% is the norm for the United States. When you take men's jobs and their livelihood away, their families break up. 1/3 of the Negro children in this city were living in homes without fathers. 1/4 of the children born are illegitimate. Half the firstborn children are illegitimate. Families break up and they have to live on welfare. The Aid to Families of Dependent Children program here in Detroit grew and grew despite all the economic progress of these years. 60,000 children on it last month. And you go from welfare to crime. Detroit last year had the highest robbery rate of any city in the American nation. Look at those 11-year-old children breaking and entering like hardened criminals. Think what their future is. Robbery is a form of violence. Riots are a form of violence. But even now, I don't think we see what's behind the violence. It's not just a demand for possessions, for owning things. It's a demand for self-respect, for manhood.
Now, the black man is not going to be subservient. No man is going to be subservient. I am the father of my son. I must be the father of my son so that my son respect me. I am the man of my house. I can't sit here and let you give my son food. Then my son grows to respect you. He's not mine. The only things that are mine are those things that I am able to control and able to contribute. Out of me this thing must come through my labor. If I don't expend any labor, then what I got coming is crumbs. You see, my black parents have done this to me in the past. They haven't gotten this pride. They have not learned that a man must be a man or he is nothing.
There are different ways to try to be a man. One is a job on the assembly line at Ford, making $7,500 a year. But if you're not treated like a man, but humiliated because you have a black skin, it doesn't mean much. A man has to have dignity, self-respect. These people are trapped. The white world identifies them as black, and the black world now scorns them. The rioters call them Uncle Toms when they tried to protect the firemen who were fighting the fires. Many now feel cut off from their black brothers, but many identify with the frustration and the rage of the rioters.
You call us savages and beasts and mad dogs running the street burning and looting, but we're doing this not for the destruction of the world, but we're trying to prove one point. We want freedom and justice and equality. We want to be treated equal. The best thing to do is give us freedom or at this place will riot with blood.
Who speaks for him? Who speaks for them? Who speaks for their frustration, for their rage? No one speaks for them yet, but the extremists, the revolutionaries, speak to them.
We have gotten our manhood back by the acts of violence. When the brother throws a brick or snipes from a building, that he has just returned to his manhood.
Personally, I advocate violence. I accept it. When people die, it's just part of a revolution. I accept it. I'm sorry that they're dead, but it's just one part of a revolution. People have to die. Some gonna live and some gonna die.
The extremists, the revolutionaries, say the black people have been left with no alternative but to gain by violence what they've been denied by peaceful means. The extremists offer manhood through violence. They offer self-respect. They offer pride in being black, dignity in being black, beauty in being black. They are saying it every day, and black people are listening.
So I think it's pretty clear that the radicals didn't start this riot, but they'll be happy to take credit for it, and expect there are going to be more, because they have no confidence that this country is going to do anything to change the conditions of life for the underclass we have seen growing up here around us on Linwood Avenue. We've seen them. They're not particularly able people, but they're hurt and angry and determined that
self-respect. They offer pride in being black, dignity in being black, beauty in being black. They are saying it every day, and black people are listening.
So I think it's pretty clear that the radicals didn't start this riot, but they'll be happy to take credit for it, and expect there are going to be more, because they have no confidence that this country is going to do anything to change the conditions of life for the underclass we have seen growing up here around us on Linwood Avenue. We've seen them. They're not particularly able people, but they're hurt and angry and determined to see a change in their lives. They want self-respect. They want manhood. Now they can get it through work and responsibility, like lots of other Negroes around us here have got it, or they can get it through violence and terrorism. It seems to me the point is that either way it will work for them, so that in a certain sense their future is already settled. It's America's future that is in doubt.
If we are not allowed to exercise our freedom, then we will do whatever is necessary to gain our freedom. And if that means tearing up the community to gain our freedom, we will.
During the riot in Detroit, 43 died, all but 10 of them Negroes. 6,670 people were arrested. Most were Negroes. Many were left homeless. Almost all of them Negroes. The black extremists did not start this riot. It was not planned. It exploded because the black people were angry and frustrated. But once it started, the extremists began to move in. What follows are the facts about their activities during and after the riot as we've been able to piece them together. The riot began on 12th Street. 12th Street has been deteriorating in recent years. Urban renewal projects have uprooted 50,000 families in other areas and jammed 4 to 6 families into houses meant for one. It's not a slum by Harlem or what standards, but it's been getting worse. It's become a concentration point for alcoholics, narcotics peddlers, prostitutes, thieves, and hustlers. And these are the people who started the Detroit riot. The riot started here. This is a Blind Pig, an after-hours club. At 3:45 Sunday morning, July 23rd, it was raided. The raid was routine, called a nuisance raid by police.
83 people were arrested in that raid on the Blind Pig. Police found no whiskey, but did confiscate 6 cases of beer. The crowd had begun to form, attracted by 8 police cars parked outside and by the shouting and screaming from inside. Rocks and bottles were thrown. And shortly after 6 o'clock, the first store was broken into by the crowd.
Between 6 and 8:30 a.m., the disturbance turned into a riot. Looting was at first unorganized. It was directed primarily against white merchants, some because of the way they treated Negroes, some because of the high prices they charged, all because they were white. As the looting went on, people who had opposed it caught the fever. By 10 a.m., organized groups had moved in to encourage it. They spread the word by phone, encouraged crowds to break windows and loot. The first fire was reported at 8:24. Here on 12th Street. And then, significantly, there were no more fires for another 4 hours, time enough for any group that was organized to get in touch with its people and get them into operation. But then, within the next 4 hours, a group of incendiaries moved south along 12th Street, triggering 17 separate fires in the process. And then, between 4 o'clock and midnight of Sunday, 4 additional groups of incendiaries appeared to go in operation. One along Linwood, another along Dexter, another along this part of Grand River, and another along this part of Grand River. And by midnight, a second wave of firebombing had broken out along 12th Street, but nothing of any consequence yet in the eastern zone. During the next 2 hours, or until 2 o'clock Monday morning, there were additional firebombings along this section of Grand River. Another wave of firebombings moved north along Dexter Avenue. Molotov cocktails were thrown into stores for the first time along the John Lodge Freeway and into shops and stores along Woodward Avenue. And a new wave of firebombing broke out a considerable distance away in the eastern zone along Kercheval. During the next 2 hours, or until 4 o'clock Monday morning, the incendiary unit that had been operating along this section of Grand River appeared to move west along Warren. And a new area was brought under firebombing attack up here just south of Roosevelt Field. There were additional fires along Woodward, and this unit seemed to be moving eastward along the connecting streets. And the incendiary team operating over here on Kercheval was extending its perimeter. By now, the riot was 24 hours old. Now, the firebombing continued for at least another 48 hours, but that gives the pattern. And throughout the firebombing, there appeared to be at least 5 and perhaps as many as 10 incendiary groups at work. This man was one of them. We have hidden his face to protect his identity, but we verified that he did the things he says he did.
Then we went over to a meeting that was taking place between the militants and Wildermere and Gladstone.
What kind of a building was it?
It was an apartment building, and they have an after-hours place downstairs.
And you went down with the other 2 men?
Right.
How many people were there?
Maybe 50 to 70 people, I'd say.
And who was leading the meeting?
There was a young lady and a man leading. They were saying things that started the way they were, and it really had grown into a riot. They weren't really ready for it at the time, but since it had grown to what it was, they might as well make the best of it. They had a plan, but it wasn't scheduled to take off. They had no idea it was going to happen like that.
But they were going to put the plan into effect.
Right. They were getting little groups together, giving instructions on certain groups, certain leaders taking over and having the group go like onto Dexter Avenue, on the other group going over to Grand River. We were told to break the windows in the store, and get the people to break the windows, get the people who had gone in and looted, and then burn the building.
Did you leave to do that then?
Yes, I did.
Then you went and did what the lady told you to do.
Right. We went up back on 12th, and there was a paint store on Blaine and 12th. The windows had been broke. They told us to throw our cocktails in there. So first of all, I threw a can of cock gas, and then I threw the cocktails in. We ran down to the pawn shop, U.S. Loan, and we pulled up the screen mats for the people to go up under. He told me to get the rifles and pass them out. So I went in and grabbed an armload of rifles and threw them out to the people, and then went back and got some more.
Sunday night, the first night, sporadic sniper fire began to be directed against police and firemen. Sniping was organized. There were few snipers, but they were mobile and able to tie up large forces.
After we had went up and burned up a few stores and things, we went to this place over on the east side, right off of Kercheval, and it was a little house. We went up to it, and it was this white guy answered the door. You know, then there was another whitey. No, it was a white girl inside also. And we went into the house, and I sat down, and he went into the back, and they talked for a while. Then he called me back there, and he told me to pick out a weapon. So I took a rifle, and he took a rifle, and he also took a pistol.
Were the guns loaded?
Yeah. He had loaded the gun. He took me from there, and we drove around. Then we went up on Linwood and Hazelwood, and we got into one of the buildings up there. It was pretty dark then, and we got up on that building and waited for the National Guards and state troopers to come down on the street. And when they came, he opened fire, and then I started firing.
Did he hit anybody?
Yeah, he hit two people, and I saw them go down. I don't know if I hit any or not. I'm not too sure now, because I was just firing.
The riot shut down all of Detroit, not just the riot zone. Stores, restaurants, hotels, businesses closed. 41 fire companies from outside of Detroit were required to bring the fires under control. There were no fire companies in reserve, none to protect the rest of Detroit or its suburbs. Detroit, by the fourth day, was near total disaster.
Going down the wrong way.
2 months after the riot, Detroit remains tense. Any spark could set off another riot.
Somewhere, sometime, it might be next week, tomorrow, next month, next year, you know, it's going to be more or less guerrilla warfare. They've already started little schools and things. So when the younger fellas in the movement...
Did you go to one of these?
Yeah.
Where was it located?
This was in a four-family flat over on the east side, down in the basement. They were having a little class.
Did they talk about arms or explosives at all?
Oh, yeah. What they wanted, they had rifles and things already, but they wanted explosives. They said they were supposed to get these from California, that they were going to get some explosives from California, from the Watts area, and that they were going to go up in Canada and get the dynamite because they could get it easy up there.
What else did they say about their plans for the future?
It was just to try to blow up sewers and power plants and things like that. I know some of it is supposed to start this winter.
Why? What have they said?
This is a thing against the police.
Is there a white man involved in the movement?
Yes, it is. I don't know his name.
Where does he live?
I believe up in Pontiac. I'm not sure.
The militants don't like the idea of him being in this?
Oh, they don't like the idea of him being involved at all.
Then why don't they do something?
They can't because he got something that they need. I don't know what it is, but they just can't get rid of him completely.
Is there a leader in Detroit?
Yes, there is a leader. The leader is right now that if he said burn down Detroit, the downtown part right now, the whole downtown section would be in flames.
How do you know that?
Because of his power with the militant group, and the militant group follows him.
How do you know that?
Because I know. I know they would follow him. Because he has fired certain places, he has had certain places burned down since the riot.
In the last 10 days of August, there were 62 fires in which arson was suspected. At least 18 of these were known to have been started by Molotov cocktails. Firemen believe arson teams set many of the rest.
If there's another riot in Detroit, the extremists intend to control it. The leaders are few in number. For the most part, they are nationalists, Marxists, and separatists. They reject integration. They call themselves blacks, not Negroes. They are giving this country until next summer to fulfill the promises made to the Negroes, but they do not think it will. They believe there is no real alternative to violence. Their aim is to create chaos, to bring about a confrontation between black and white. For his own safety, this man's face cannot be shown. He is in the inner circle of black extremists. Some of what he says may sound to you like fantasy, but we have confirmed from other sources among black revolutionaries that what he has told us is fact. Tell me about what their plans are. What would they do here in Detroit that they didn't do this time?
Well, number one, they would start with police headquarters and work their way up. This time, it's not going to be any burning. It's not going to be so much burning and looting. It's going to be people's lives that are at stake.
How many persons are in the hardcore leadership here in Detroit?
Roughly here in Detroit, I would say roughly we have a dozen or so.
And how about in other cities?
Roughly about the same.
Are they in pretty close contact with each other?
Very close contact. Very close.
And are they centrally directed from New York?
Basically, yes.
From Rat Brown?
Not so much Rap Brown. There are some people over Rap Brown. You must realize that, too.
Is there a behind-the-scenes leader in Detroit?
Yes, there is.
Is he white or black?
He's the same color you are, brother.
The black extremists do not speak for the Negroes of Detroit, but they and the white extremists are pressing for a showdown.
You better quit running around here talking about loving these honkies to death. During rebellions, brother, you got to stop looting and start shooting. Black power, brother. Black power!
Both sides are recruiting for a battle they're prepared to fight in the streets. The July riot is only the beginning of what they anticipate. The black extremist argues there is no other way for the Negro. They want violence. They want people to be killed. If enough Negroes are killed, they believe, there will be no room left for moderation. All Negroes will be forced to join them as troops. Many whites are now more eager to join battle than we might believe. They feel it's time to force moderate whites to choose sides. If the extremists can divide the rest of us into two hostile camps, all of our hopes for the future will be lost. Can we prevent it? How can we prevent it? Are we prepared to do now the things that must be done to prevent it? What did we learn from this? We learned that the Negro Revolution has changed, that over these last 2 years it has become a revolution of angry people, demanding not only rights but equality, demanding that self-esteem that is still denied them, that there is now a rage against this lack of dignity and manhood that runs throughout the entire Negro community, that up to now it has been a spontaneous, unplanned rage. But here in Detroit, it began to be controlled by black extremists. That these black extremists are willing and eager to risk a bloody showdown with white society.
We only got their stores this time. Next time, it would be them. We're tired. We've been pushed to the ledge, and all of a sudden we say, well, it's either me or him. Look at them. They're wondering, what will it be next? Their home, their kids, them? Yes, this is what it would be, them, not us.
The black extremists speak plainly. They believe there is no hope for the black man in white America. They want to tear it down. They tell us they intend to burn our cities. How do we answer them? With guns and fire, as white extremists demand? With wholesale arrests? Will it solve all the problems if we lock up Rap Brown, Stokely Carmichael, and the other leaders?
Another Stokely would arise day after tomorrow. I don't think attacking leaders or attacking tendencies or people who express a particular point of view is going to change the conditions that exist in the ghetto. It is conditions that create people, not people who create conditions. Militants are expressing many of the fears and are expressing many of the hopes and aspirations of black people. So that the kinds of things that it sounds like to a person to whom this experience is alien, like the average white American, it tends to terrorize him and to frighten him. But it does not, as it does to the average black, represent the expression of these subterranean feelings, which he thought could not be brought out into daylight, which he thought could not be said without the world coming to an end. To listen just literally to what people say is to miss what is the main thrust of what they're trying to express. And they're trying to express this sense of alienation, this sense of deep self-hatred that has been created among black people.
This happened on 12th Street in Detroit in July. Next time, it could happen downtown or in your town. And we've learned this, that the old answers are no longer acceptable, that the old solutions will not prevent what has happened to our cities these last summers. Will our cities burn again next summer? Will more Americans be shot down in the streets of their own cities? I'm convinced they will be, unless a great deal more is done. And I don't mean the sort of thing we have been doing. I think we must say to the Negroes and the whites that this country is our joint possession. We all own it. And we will not stand here and watch the fabric of American society completely torn apart. And I think you must say with the same degree of conviction and fervor that the time has come to do something massively about the conditions under which the Negro lives. Things are wrong. We are going to change them. And we're going to change them on a massive scale. But while we're cleaning up this house, we're not going to let you tear it down around us.
Exactly. We are going to fail in everything we try if we don't start with the proposition that there has got to be an end to violence. And this, up until now, could have been seen as a problem. How do you control a mob? How do you prevent a mob from forming, even? But we have seen in this city a cohort of half-educated, half-crazed young people who are planning violence. And if they only do half what they say, and only 1 out of 20 of them does anything, they really can tear this country apart. Because we are very clearly involved with the makings of conspiracy. And we've got to stop it. But we can not stop it in good conscience if we don't do the next thing, which is to say no conspiracy can succeed without the existence of an enormous, troubled, disorganized, agonized lower class, such as we have seen on the streets here. We can't change the minds of these young radicals. We can stop their conspiring, and we can take away the raw material of their revolution. And the American people will solve this situation to the extent, first, that we do not overpromise, and two, that we undertake to do things that have direct and immediate impact upon the people who are involved. We have got to have full employment. Everybody has to work, and no one should be allowed to excuse himself for not working. I think the United States government can become the employer of last resort, so that, in effect, anyone seeking work, not finding it after a point, a job is found for him, period. American business has not produced full employment in this country, although it's talked about it for a quarter century. American unions have not produced full employment, and indeed both have pursued practices which probably have been as much negative in this respect as positive. The second thing I think we have to do is get a certain measure of income redistribution. It's too far from the bottom to the top in this country. Has stayed that way too long. A perfectly clear proposal would be to establish a family allowance, such as they have in every industrial democracy in the world, say the United States, a system whereby persons raising dependent children, parents, each month receive a flat payment to help with the cost of those children. Do it without social workers, do it without charity, put money in the hands of people and let them run their own lives. We've also got to face the problem of integration. If you were to put bets on any one thing, I think it would have to be that the largest single source of the difficulties of the Negro people in this country is that they are not allowed to move freely in this society. We talk about giving a man a sense of his own dignity and manhood. What manhood do you have if the fact is that you can only live in one part of the city? And you know it. We're not a racist country, but there is racial feeling. It starts somewhere and it stays with most people, and we don't see that there's a white problem in this country that is the worst of them all. What's at stake is something more than the old problem of white and black in America. 40 years ago, every industrial democracy in the world had slums such as we've seen here in Detroit, had troubled, disorganized people such as we've talked to here in Detroit. One by one, the other countries have got rid of those problems. We have been saying we're going to get rid of these problems. We have been saying we're going to have full employment, we're going to have good housing, we're going to have equal opportunity. And it never happens. We keep saying it, but we don't do it. And after a point, the question is, can you do it? The issue is not just can we clean up Linwood Avenue, the issue is can we make this country function correctly. And if we find we can't in the face of this crisis, in this confrontation of this reality, if we can't do it, the question is whether we really still control our own destiny.
They say this is a big rich town, but I live in the poorest part. I know I'm on a dead-end street in a city without a heart. I learned to fight before I was 6, the only way I could get along. When you're raised on a dead-end street, you gotta be tough and strong. Now all the guys I know getting against you, how can you win? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm gonna push my way.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us on monthly Pan-African film series. And you just finished watching with us The Summer of ’67, which provides one perspective, the media's perspective of what happened. And we're joined with our comrade Afro Phoenix is also here. So we're gonna be part of doing the discussion. And Afro Phoenix, as well as in the comments, what were some of your initial thoughts and reactions to the film?
First of all, Afro Phoenix here, first of all, is that it is a white man, and of course, given the perspective of their own assumptions about what's going on. And so that was my initial reaction, is that somebody else is trying to tell what is actually going on, and they really don't have a clue.
I agree. This is my third time watching it, and my stomach turns every single time because it's very, you can see that it's very like one-sided. It does try to share a little bit about what happened, but it's definitely a different version of what actually happened. And drop in the comments your reactions, and just to share some context about what was happening in Detroit. So one thing I saw was they set up this false frame of like Africans are represented in police and education and Congress and the legislator session. Like, we have no idea why this happened. And then it started doing this other narrative of like extreme Africans versus other Africans. Like, instead of them calling themselves Negroes, they call themselves the Blacks or something, it said. So it was just really strategic of how they weren't sharing context about what happened. What led up to the uprisings in Detroit is so much context. There was vast police brutality, misconduct by the police. They investigate themselves. They're found not guilty. The NAACP was involved. ACLU was involved. Oftentimes people that were being murdered, they were allegedly so-called doing some low-level property crime. Police murdered our people, and then there was no consequences, of course, right? That would happen. And also, we can't have justice in this injustice system anyway. And what they found also in people who did research, because it wasn't really accounted for how many people were being murdered. So 219 people were murdered from 1957 to 1973. And there's numbers not accounted for, right? They were just like going through public record to try to see, to find out what was happening. And also, young people were being murdered as well during this time. And the people were organizing against it. And so what happened on their raid, that's what they called it, a legitimate raid where we only found beer, was there was a homecoming celebration for GIs, and they were arresting everyone at the party. And the people were trying to stop our people from being arrested. So they were blocking the police vehicles that were arresting people, and they started looting stores in order to stop the arrest of our people who were, of course, not doing nothing. So that's context that was happening during the uprisings. I'm gonna drop more of that information that you could be able to read on the report that talks about that in the chat as well. So that's context for what was going on. Like we're seeing now, police brutality, continuous racial discrimination, lots of things that were going on. Oh, one more thing. So In December 1960 to January 1961, 1,500 African men were falsely arrested, illegally and falsely arrested, and often tortured because there were 2 European women that were murdered. And they were, again, tortured. Like, things were happening, like things that we see now, more context. So uprisings did not just all of a sudden happen. Uprisings happens for a reason, right? Because of the oppression, the exploitation, and the harm and the murder. These are lynchings that are happening up against our people. And the people were not having our people be arrested. So just wanting to share that context, I'm going to drop that report in the chat.
And as you mentioned, that is so happening. What's going on right now, over 50-something years ago, that this was happening, and it has only escalated. And we Africans are being even more oppressed. And this all goes back to, of course, why the police were formed in the first place. They were slave patrols, and that's what they still are to this day. And the reason to get you stopped and arrested is the color of your skin.
Agreed. They're definitely part of maintaining the system. And even in the news report, right? Again, just mentioning Ramiro, like you saw during the introduction, right before the film, that was a clip from an anti-conquista that Ramiro had been a project that he had been a part of. And so that was talking about like capitalism and what that does and how that's causing harm and imperialism. And so that's what these white supremacist, police officers are. They're working to uphold the system. Like even in the news report, he's like talking about, and they're going against white officers and they're being in opposition against white officers, right? But I thought the police department had Black officers in it too, or African officers in it too. And it's so even the language of not respecting white police officers that was depicted throughout the film was really interesting to me because it just really, they're not hiding, right? They're not hiding white supremacy. They're not hiding what's needed, what they feel is needed in this society, right? To be conditioned. What do you think, Afro-Phoenix, the purpose was the way it was framed? Like it was framed to fear Africans, right? It was framed like Africans were a lower class, creating harm. Like, why do you think that frame happened throughout the whole entire news report?
Of course, to demonize African people and to make it seem as if the Africans were responsible for all these conditions were going on, but it's just the opposite. The conditions was responsible for the racism and the violence that was occurring.
I really like the way you put that. The conditions were the responsible parties of what's going on. So true. That is really deep. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So with all of the, I noticed that they were talking about how Detroit, how the middle class Africans were upstanding, upright citizens, and they enjoyed a level of prosperity unequal anywhere else in the United States, as I have now learned, the United States, than anywhere else. But this happened right in Detroit. It's supposed to be the place where Africans enjoyed the most prosperity than anywhere else. But it was the underlying conditions of, again, about the poverty, the killing and arresting African people, the segregation, the law enforcement of murdering, and that's what they just flat out murder people and cover it up and they are not accountable at all, and they get away with it all the time, and they have been getting away with it for a long, long time. Of course, this is all the holdover from when they went in. The Europeans went in and stole our ancestors and brought them here, and now again the same conditions that they were facing back then. Although they say that we're free, we're not free. We're not full citizens of this country, and this is a stolen country that they do not acknowledge. They do not acknowledge at all.
I agree. This is a complete, stolen land. We've been fighting. Our people have been fighting since they were kidnapped. Resources are still stolen from Africa. And the other thing I heard him saying toward the end, I have wrote notes and I'm trying to find it. Do they intend to burn our cities down? How this depiction of the fear and us being violent. Like, y'all are the violent ones. In all ways, in all aspects, you have been brutal, like genocide, rape, murder, beat, torture, tear apart families, like name it, it exists. Like, are people being enslaved and still are? Like, they don't even get to like say the word violence, because they don't even like them saying like we're like trying to depict the revolutionaries as like we're the violent, like our people are the violent ones. Like, no, organizers who are revolutionaries are working to fight for freedom because you're violent and you're still violent, right? But they had really good tactics of like using media, like whitewashing media, and conditioning people to separate us as a people, right? And so it's so critical that we come together to see like we're this Africans, wherever we are, we have to be together, we have to be united. Look what was happening in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. If you look up uprisings and they'll use words like riots, you will see thousands of pictures of our people fighting, and they're fighting for equal rights. They're fighting for their humanity. They're fighting to live, right? And they're fighting for their freedom. And so they don't even get to say the word violent because that's not even real. 43 people died that day. And out of the 43 people that died, 33 were African. The majority of people that were murdered, lynched, were shot in the back. They would also like release people and like at gunpoint, young people. And as they were leaving, because they were told to leave, they would shoot them in their back. Like, y'all fools are violent. Our people are just trying to live and survive in this racist society. The other thing that we saw in the film was internalized oppression. So our people have been conditioned for so many generations. And so we saw a mother talking about the struggles of raising 6 kids and like not being able to like do other things. We saw another African man talking about like a handout. Like, we saw those kind of things. We saw 2 Africans allegedly talk about acts of revolution that were supposedly going to happen in the future. So we saw like a lot of internalized oppression. Why do you think they put that in the film, Afro Phoenix?
Of course, demonization again. That's what they always do. And that way, so the reason why all of these things were going on is because it was the African people who were causing the problem, which is just the opposite. Also, it's not only the police, it's the military as well, because they sent in, what's his name, George, he was the governor of Detroit. He called in the National Guard. So it was not only the police, it was the National Guard that came in as well. So the whole military turned supposed citizens, which of course we're not, but that's what they brought in to retaliate and to control us. So I'm trying to think of, he's the father of Romney. George Romney, the original George Romney, was the governor of Detroit at that time. And he called in the National Guard also. And of course, his son, Mitt Romney, is, what'd you say?
No, thank you for bringing that up about how the military and the police work side by side, about how Europeans, like the system uses the military industrial complex to also do control, right? And how we see that even happening during the uprisings that were happening during the pandemic, right? During Black Lives Matter. And so just really similar, our indigenous comrades, relatives, fighting for against pipelines, happening on the land that poisons the land and poisons the water, right? We saw that happen there as well with continued police brutality as well as military as well.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And also, what was going on at this time was the segregation and how the Africans were moving to the cities, or they're moving into the urban areas. And so, of course, white people were fleeing because they were moving to the suburbs, because the blacks and the Africans were coming to the industrial area for jobs, so that they could hopefully get a job so that they could sustain themselves. And with all the things that were going on, of course, with the new laws that were implemented, like redlining and the Jim Crow laws and things like this, were still very much into effect. And they were implementing these policies of control and oppression even more so.
Yes. Jim Crow was huge. In the area.
Yeah. So, and I recall this was back during earlier this year during the pandemic. They would say, "Well, why you set fire to your own places?" It's because they don't own any of these things. And the real ownership is with the indigenous people of this country that were here before the Europeans came. So what happened is that so they didn't own anything, and so it's not like they were really at a loss. They were saying, "Well, why do you loot and burn your own neighborhood?" It's because they don't own anything. Everything in this country is owned by white men.
Yeah, it's so deep, when you think about Africans in this country who have tried to just have like equal rights. We can't even get that, something as simplistic as that in this country. I mean, you can't do that in a society that's embedded in white supremacy. And so we have to fight. We've had to fight for the right to education, right to employment, right to vote, like name it. Our people have been fighting for the right to something, right? And so one thing that the Europeans in the news, this news trash story talked about was there was no confidence for change. Completely agree with that. We have no confidence in this country and this society to change what they're doing, to change how they continuously oppress our people, exploit our people, no matter where they are. So they're not just doing that here. They're doing that also in Africa, which was important. Why the first, the anti-conquista clip was shown, because it was talking about imperialism, right? And that's what's happening in Africa and other countries, right? Where violence is happening that this country is causing. And so there's no faith at all. Like, we are in 2021. What our people have less home ownership like than they did in the 1950s. Like, when you look at any statistic, our people are not thriving. And the reason why a massive uprising has to happen is because they're not going to care and have humanity for our humanity. They don't care about us. Look at this whole entire film. It's like 52 minutes of false propaganda against our people. Like so many lies was in this film, mixed in with some truth, right? And so they threw in some Malcolm X, they threw in some Kwame Ture, at the time Story Carmichael, they threw in other revolutionary leaders that they didn't interview, right? They just threw in these clips. And then they threw in our people who have some internalized oppression, right? And then these Europeans were like, they're the dominant ones and the ones that know what to do right. And they don't know why any of this is happening. We're living in harmony. Why are you all doing this? Like, fool, y'all are killing us. And so I think about the article that I'm going to post in the chat by Hood Communism. Like, we're at war. Like, we have been at war, like you said, Afro Phoenix, since they kidnapped us. Like, every single colonized person, so every single person of color is at war with this society, is at war with this society that's embedded in white supremacy, because they target all of us. And other Europeans who are also poor don't realize that they're being targeted too. They're just not being targeted at the level that we're being targeted at. And so one thing that I liked about some of the clips that were being shown is our people were out there being mobilized. And it was making me think about, like, if our people can be this collective of like massive uprisings, massive organizing, to really do what we need to do, right? This system isn't going to be there for us ever. And it hasn't changed. Like, those numbers in the 1960s around police brutality are even higher now. They're higher than they were then, where African people have the most number of police brutality or being killed by the police. And the first is our indigenous relatives, right? That happens too.
Right. Well, the one thing that another I was thinking about, the African woman was telling about. We like, our houses are worth $18,000, and how they don't want just anybody moving into the area. And that other African man who was out there blabbing to the media, and supposedly his identity was being protected, but he's the first one to arrest, because he's incriminating himself to them. And so I thought that was pretty laughable, is that he was telling everything he knew, and in opposition to the people who were, as they say, rioting, but people who were showing their discontent with what was going on in these neighborhoods. So again, that shows how we're so uneducated. We're so politically uneducated. And again, this is exhibiting the self-hatred, again, of oppression, to where it's internalized. And you're giving power to the oppressor. And that's exactly what they were doing. Both that woman and that man, the woman who's talking about our $18,000 homes, and then the other one's talking about he was part of the inner circle, and he was telling about who the leaders were and the guns and what they did and stuff like that.
Yeah, I agree. Incriminating yourselves to people who don't care about you at all. If you know what anything was said in those interviews were true, right? We never know. But I agree that, you know, that film talked about like a lot of fearing, but not just teaching Europeans to fear Africans, teaching other Africans to fear Africans, like you were talking about the woman who was saying, you know, about the $18,000 home and the neighborhood's not safe anymore and those kind of things. So it's teaching other Africans to fear Africans too. And so that self-hate has to be unpacked, has to be unlearned, because the media messages that we receive are so, they're so heavy, they're constant, whether it's in songs, whether it's in music, whether it's in the news, it's just constantly elevated to fear us, like we're the problem, because we're not the problem.
Right. The indoctrination that starts before you're even born.
Yeah, that's real.
I remember I remember when I was a student in elementary school, we had to say the Pledge of Allegiance, and I really never felt the connection to that, because the Pledge of Allegiance, and that's just another form of indoctrination, brainwashing. They say every from the time before you're even born, and it's reinforced, and it's so pervasive in all aspects of our very existence, before, during, and after we're here.
That is so real. I remember, I think around 8 years old, I stopped standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. It was very clear that they weren't talking about me or anyone that looked like me. Yeah, that was just like, no, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna stand. And so the indoctrination is so deep and so heavy and so ingrained. That's why like political education is so important, because if somebody just watched that film for face value, again, I watched it 3 times, and that was before I read the article by Black Agenda that really goes into depth and the context about what led up to those uprisings. Like I already knew watching it, just because of AAPRP. I watched it like with a critical eye and a critical lens. So I already knew like there's like a lot of gaps that this news story is not talking about. They're depicting us in like this negative connotation way. Like there was a lot of things missing. And so I was so glad by the 3rd time me watching it, I had the Black Agenda report to actually read to understand what really happened. So like I totally appreciate the revolutionaries that are out there sharing the real stories that happen. I wish that I had the opportunity to interview people who actually, you know, if we heard their stories about what happened, like those people who were being arrested, like who were at a celebration for the homecoming and what happened, you know, hearing other stories about what happened as well. Cause I knew a little bit about the riots or uprisings, but not enough, not at all. I learned so much in the film, as well as researching as well and reading that article. So I'm definitely curious and wanting to know more from our stories, like from our side.
Right. The other thing that I was so unaware because I lived through that time. I was a young adult at that time, and I had just returned or being separated from the military at that time, and I was just so, as I said, so unaware of what was going on. It was happening all around me, but I was so oppressed, so uninformed, so uneducated that I was not aware of what was going on. And of course, blaming myself for the conditions that I was encountering and living. That's what I was living. I did not realize.
Yeah.
Again, back to the importance of political education.
Mm-hmm.
So necessary, so necessary.
Afro Phoenix, is there any like questions that you want to discuss, or anything that also struck you in the film?
Oh yes. And especially from reading Black Agenda Report about how covering up the lies they tell and the unaccounted for. They just like it doesn't matter. Like the lives of African people does not matter at all. They're just like fodder. And again, just a source of income. And not only for a job. That's the thing I always talk about, jobs. They wanted to create jobs, but jobs that are not sustainable, that will not sustain a person's life or their families. And they have no or very little chance of making any kind of progress in conditions to bettering themselves. Again, just so much covered up of the thousands of lives that are lost and covered up, and the police just killing them with impunity. It does not matter at all. And that's what I was just, it's not surprising from what I've learned thus far in AAPRT, but I was totally unaware again. And I think probably a majority of people still to this day are unaware. And that's why it's important, again, that we reach out and help to wake up our sleeping people.
Yes, that's so important. I'm so glad that you shared that. So during this time, the NAACP was involved. Other organizations locally on the ground, African organizations, were involved in organizing, and AAPRP, is an organization that's organizing to fight for our people. And so it makes me think about how you move from seeing and knowing what's happening in your community to move to organizing, right? Because the conditions are not going to change. And one thing that they did during this time is they elected a liberal mayor, a liberal European mayor, who they thought was going to do right by the people, right? And they didn't. And so countless times we've seen this happen, right? Like no matter where you are, you see in the United States, you see the harm that's being done. And then you try to elect somebody who says they're going to do right by the people. They don't do right by the people, right? There's none of these police investigations that happen because they investigate themselves and find themselves not guilty, yada, yada, yada. And more of our people are murdered. And so it's like, that's exhausting. That's beyond exhausting. And because we are connected as an African people, we carry that with us. We carry the harm that's been done to our people, but we also carry the resistance of our ancestors that have fought for our liberation. We carry with us. And the way they fought is they organized. So at that uprising that happened in Detroit, they were organizing in a way they didn't know like their people were going to be locked up. So they were just on the flim trying to organize to stop their people from being arrested. So when we think on a larger scale, how do we stop them from doing what they're doing to our people, no matter where they are? Like, we have to organize in order to build something new. And we have to organize and to have a one unified socialist Africa, because not only is there corruption embedded in this society, their corruption is embedded in Africa, their corruption is embedded in other countries. And so the only way to stop imperialism is to get it off, right? And so the only way you do that is you organize. And so that the criticalness of those organizations that were in Detroit organizing was so significant and so important to what happened. And that's what we have to do, no matter where you are. If you are African, you should be in an organization organizing to liberate our people, doing political education for us to learn about our strengths, to learn about our struggles, to learn about our collectiveness, to connect to one another as well, and to build a mass movement. And so I don't even know how many like uprisings there have been since our people were kidnapped, right, from Africa. We know there's over 500 documented uprisings that happened aboard slave ships. We know there's hundreds of uprisings that happened when our people were, enslaved. And we know, like, after the Civil War, there's been still hundreds of uprisings. And so this is an opportunity for us to see another person in office who has made promises, right? Made promises, and none of those promises are going to be upheld. So we saw, more money being a bill, more money for police, which means more harm to our people. We saw our people in Haitians being deported, right? That happened. And so what this taught me was we need to know our stories, we need to organize, and we need to really counter their false narrative, their false propaganda, and really tell about the truths of what's happening, not just in this country, but what's happening all over, that's creating like genocide. Because man, that story was really, really, it was trash. That story was trash. I don't even have the words for it, but my stomach just would turn. Like, I'm listening to it and I'm like telling my son, because he listened to it once with me, what do you think about it? And us talking about it. And now that I've read the report, I'm going to be able to tell him more about what really happened.
Another thing that I wanted to throw in there with it is also about identity, is knowing who we are. Because I know when you speak to people and you regard and you refer to ourselves as African, and they think that they're not Africans because they think that they're Americans. They think that they're Americans.
Yeah, could you share more about that, Afro Phoenix? Could you share more about the difference of African versus African American? Could you share like why that identity has been imposed on us?
Again, to divide us and to self-obliterate, teaching you to disavow who you are internally. And so that all relates going back to self-hatred and not being proud of who you really are and not knowing anything. Most Africans here in Turtle Island, they do not realize the people that we are descended from. They really don't. They think, a lot of them think that our existence only began after slavery, supposedly. after our so-called emancipation. We're not emancipated. That's just something they wrote on paper and announced. And again, as we have seen and witnessed, is you tell a lie so many times it is believed, and this is what they've been doing for generations. Another thing I was thinking about too is you were talking about the generations. This is what true PTSD is: post-traumatic slave disorder. Post-traumatic slave disorder, and that's what we're suffering from. Generational trauma, and it's being perpetuated and have been perpetuated for hundreds of years since we've been stolen, and they just reinforce it all the time. Reinforce it every waking moment, even when you're asleep, it's being reinforced.
Mm-hmm. Their division tactics are so strong. Like, I never even knew they tried to do like, I did know about how they try to do the separation of class, like of middle class, and people who are in poverty, but I never knew they would try to separate the extremist African organizations, or they call themselves Blacks, not Negroes. Like, what does that even mean? But I really like what you're sharing about like our identity, like understanding who we are and our connection to Africa was stripped away from us. But now we have the ability to understand that our roots come from Africa, that we are African, like our people were kidnapped from Africa. That's where we are. That's where Africans. And so, and then when you talked about the PTSD, that generational trauma that we carry, what are some ways you think that we heal from that generational trauma?
But one thing is, as we're doing now, is coming together, being politically educated, learning about the true her story and his story. And I break that down because when you say his story, it's just only one side, and it's his story. And the feminine side is most or just as important as his story, because we know that it was her story that kept us going, and that's the reason why we're still alive to this day. Because without that feminine side, none of us would be here. None of us would be here, because they are bringing forth these children of Africa.
Thank you so much for that offering, Afro Phoenix. Just checking the comments to see if anyone has any thoughts that they're thinking about the film, or any thoughts they're thinking about this discussion that we're having right now. You can post them in the chat and we can share those out loud. Afro Phoenix, I think about like the power of women, and just the power of our people in general, you know, and how like we have to be in the revolution. We have to be doing this work. This work is important. And I'm learning, I still have to continue to do more research about Guinea-Bissau, and learning about how everybody, you know, has a role in the movement. And we say that and we truly mean that, but even children, right? And so, and it's reminding me of the discussion that myself and Ramino and Onyesawu had this Thursday on about what are our gifts, right? Like what's the gifts that we have, right? That we bring to the revolution. And I think that's also part of healing. So me being involved in AAPRP, like what are the gifts that I have to offer to be part of the revolution? And so I think about, that's powerful. And I think about, you know, others that came before us, you know, the gifts that they offered to the revolution, no matter what was going on, right? When you think of like Kwame Ture or Harriet Tubman or Frederick Douglass, like the things that happened in their lives, but continued to like give their life for the revolution, right? And so we all have gifts to offer, and that gifts can be also part of healing.
Yes, I totally agree there. And everybody has a role. And I recall that young person on the show Thursday, what was said about not knowing that they were not, their role was not to go out there and be, like a soldier, like with guns and stuff like that. But they knew what their role was, and the best that they could contribute was their understanding and knowledge and skills with media. And that's what they knew that they could offer, what they were best at. And so we all come with skills that we may not acknowledge. And I realized that one of the things that I have to offer is my lived experience. My lived experience.
Yes, yes. You have so much knowledge and wisdom that you offer in the AAPRP, and like the work that you are doing with the elder care, like contacting elders to see what their needs are, right? To make sure that they have access during the pandemic. Like that's so critical. That's important. Your relationship building with other elders as well. And sharing your knowledge and wisdom is so important. Like that intergenerational learning allows us to grow.
Yes, yes. And also to acknowledge and groom our younger people. I was thinking about specifically a story I read, I read on the mainstream media about Great Britain. Is that young George Cambridge? They're grooming him. They're grooming him to be in this position. That's what we need to be doing, as grooming our young people to know where their stance is, and to build them up and support them, and groom them for the greatness that they have within them.
Yes, cultivating youth leadership is so critical, so important. Our youth are on fire, right? And providing an outlet, for that fire to be burned, and that fire to like move the movement is so important. And so, thank you for that. Like, I also think when you talk about that, like so many of the young people that were being attacked during that time and killed during that time, and even on the film, how they're like, oh, and this 11-year-old, look at what they're doing, right? Like they criminalizing our youth. We see that happening right now here in Tiwa territory, right? As this election is happening for mayor, right? The criminalizing of our young people, the criminalizing of people, that always continues to happen in this society. And so our youth can internalize that as if they're the bad person, but they're not. It's just propaganda to get more money into police departments, to get more money into youth detention centers, to push the school to prison pipeline, right? Where our young people are leading right now. They're leading, they're organizing, and they're not leaders of the future, they're leaders of now. And so what are we doing intergenerationally, to cultivate that leadership, to cultivate their curiosity, to provide that learning space and be part of their learning journey. So that's so important for us to take to be part of that. So yeah, thank you for that, because our young people are under attack. We know that Relentless Pursuit is here, pumping millions of dollars. I think it's like $9.7 million to lock up our young people being targeted in the International District. Well, who lives in the International District? Africans, Indigenous, Chicano people, right? So if you get them locked up, you get them in that pipeline, that prison industrial complex. And so shout out to SWAP, appreciate the work that you're doing to close youth detention centers, in in this state. It's so critical, it's so important. So a lot of work that people are doing to elevate our youth and support them in cultivating their gifts to lead in community.
Right on again. One of my favorite sayings from back then too. Right on.
Beautiful. So before we transition to close out the film series today, Afro Phoenix, is there anything that you would like to share with our audience?
Well, I just really appreciate all the education. Really, I do. I appreciate all the education and inspiration and witnessing things that are happening right here in our community, as well as the wider world. But just being involved with AAPRP, it's just like it's ever evolving learning process, which I appreciate. I really do. And the work that everyone does, the compassion and the humanity, and the willingness to just go out there and make it happen. I'm so proud of all of you all, including our alliances in the community as well, and the wider world.
Thank you so much, Afro Phoenix. We just want to thank you all so much for joining us in this discussion of Summer of '67. Our Pan-African Film series happens every second of the month. And so you come back and join us in August. We also want to extend an invitation to anyone who's in Tiwa territory or any others, because there's people who come from Santa Fe, to join us in the Pan-African Garden tomorrow at 4 p.m. We're going to be making benches in the Pan-African Garden. And we want to just send an invitation for you all. And we look forward to you all joining us again in August for the Pan-African Monthly Film Series. Thank you so much. Bye.
Hey, Atom, reloaded. Atom, reloaded. Junior, ha, Yawa Krum. Yawa Krum. Rasta Fuwa Krum. Rasta Fuwa Krum. Yawa Krum. Harrow Fuwa Krum. Harrow Fuwa Krum. Yawa Krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls. Fresh boys, fresh girls. Yawa Krum. Where am I? I'm Shafe, I'm Kwajalami. Yawa Krum. Rasta Fuwa Krum. Rasta Fuwa Krum. Yawa Krum. Harrow Fuwa Krum. Harrow Fuwa Krum. Yawa Krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls. Fresh boys, fresh girls. Yawa Krum. Where am I? I'm Shafe, I'm Kwajalami. Yawa Krum. Me wo krum. Asha wata so dia yan shimbo. Me jimani, me kunko. The lions den. Chata boom. Don't try me. Me dribble. Harrow Fuwa you feel in some mampo. Yes. You give a bomb money in the back. Sika shake go to kum. I got them before. No be property. Depend near your intimate sympathy. Manum Pisha, Pasho, Nanatachi, Alomo, Casapraco, and the dry daddy. Yawo Krum Bisakubabu, and Etaju. They do dope, Untimate Chiamugu. They listen Capudo, sign Dabi to Su, for the wedding blessing now. I let you Rasta Fuwa Krum, Rasta Fuwa Krum, Yawo Krum. Harrow Fuwa Krum, Harrow Fuwa Krum, Yawo Krum. Fresh boys, fresh girls, fresh boys, fresh girls, Yawo Krum. Where am I? I'm Shafe, I'm Kwajalami, Yawo Krum. Rasta Fuwa Krum, Rasta Fuwa Krum, Yawo Krum. Harrow Fuwa Krum.